Welcome to the Let's Keep It Light podcast, and thanks for listening. In this episode, Ginger and Marcie discuss light therapy in a post-COVID world.
Okay, Marcie Denton. Well, today we're going to talk about the coronavirus family, but specifically the COVID-19 virus and what's happened, what's happening again, and how we use light therapy in both COVID situations and post-COVID.
I am delighted to be visiting with you about this. It is one of the most profound changes in our understanding. And really, we thought we knew the value of photobiomodulation before COVID showed up. But once COVID showed up, the research just went crazy about how it was doing a wonderful job at both intervention and prevention. So I'd like to visit a little bit about how light therapy, the photobiomodulation, is working within the body and how it is changing how we look at its preventiveness with the virus, the COVID virus. So as a review, when we place red or infrared light on the body, it stimulates the release of nitric oxide. It increases the circulatory flow in the system. It is an essential piece to really repair and structural changes, and it is huge for our immune system. COVID is a virus. A virus is not alive. A virus has a shell, and a virus sometimes has pokey things called spikes. The COVID virus that we're familiar with is exactly that. It has a shell, and it has spikes. And when we are experiencing it, when it comes into our system, one of the remarkable things is that our body's immune system jumps into action. However, the COVID virus takes out our normal first line of defense. Well, what takes its place is nitric oxide. Nitric oxide has the capacity to I call it denature, or actually cause the virus to not function as it's supposed to. So we're like, oh my goodness, where does nitric oxide come from? It comes from our own systems. It comes from eating our own nutritional food. It comes from being in the sunlight. It comes to us as particles of light. When we add light from a pad or a panel or a microlight, we are feeding our system with something that is absolutely fantastic in terms of supporting our health and wellness, and especially if we've been introduced to the virus. The red light and the infrared have the ability to not exactly take out the effectiveness of the spike, which is the action part of the virus. When you look at the virus, and I'll talk this, so the virus comes into your body and then it attaches to a cell and it puts its RNA into your body and it makes more. That's not fair. The red light can mess with that spike, and that is a really interesting thing. There are researchers out of Boston and I think New York currently using red light being placed inside the nasal cavity. And this is because the reservoir of virus that comes into our body generally settles into our nasal cavity. And that is one of those preventative things that hasn't caught on too much, but the research shows that it is effective. So what happens then when we are exposed to this virus, and our body is fighting it. And nitric oxide is out there helping us manage the illness or manage the reaction to it. There are, I'm going to laugh at this because so often those of us who are in talking about photobiomodulation, all of a sudden you get articles in the research that are brand new to photobiomodulation, and they're just talking about it as if it's the very first thing they've ever heard of. But for those of us who've been working in this, we have absolutely no problem saying that photobiomodulation is fantastic if you have been infected and your lungs are going crazy. We have experiences with that. Ginger, I'd like you to talk about the light and you and COVID, if you don't mind.
In the very beginning of the pandemic, before we actually knew it was a pandemic, before we knew what the virus was, I don't even know if I knew the name of it yet, but it was just happening. I had lunch with a friend of mine that had been terribly sick for a couple of months with this unknown something or another. And whether or not us being in the restaurant, that's what happened, or if I caught something from her, I went home and, within 24 hours, I was shaking and feeling weird and everything. So my very first experience with what I think was COVID was that because this is prior to any test for COVID or anything, right? And so I got under my light pad system for, no kidding, maybe about 2 hours. I kept turning on, off, on, it would turn off, I turn it back on. And whatever that was, knocked it out of my system. Well, then in November of that year, I actually was able to get tested the next time I got sick. My kids were in school and they came home from school and one of them was sick and I got sick. And I felt it. I felt it in my nasal passage. When I got tested, I had COVID and I got really sick. And so I was so sick that I couldn't really get out of bed. And so I knew that I should be using the light therapy system, but I was actually too sick to use the system. So every time I would start this terrible coughing fit, my kid would run over to me and throw the lights on the front and back of my chest, and within about 30 seconds, I would stop coughing. This went on for a couple of weeks, actually. So I credit light therapy for me surviving that bout of COVID. I never did have to go into the hospital, but, I did test positive for COVID for 90 days, if you can believe that. I was as surprised as anybody on that one. But that's my immediate, story of knowing that it helped me survive. I have a lot of, which we'll get to, people's experiences post-COVID and how we use light therapy for helping clear the lungs.
When we say that it made a difference, what did it do? That's what I'd like to talk about right now, is that the immune system we name them cytokines, and we say they have letters and numbers, and what does that mean? Well, the researchers and the scientists have named the kinds of chemistry that cause trouble, that are infective in causing inflammation and causing damage to tissue. So what they were able to do right about the time that you were that sick is they began to look at what happened when we put light on the system. And one of the things that it does is what we've already talked about. Photobiomodulation decreases the chemistry, the cytokines that cause inflammation, and increase the anti-inflammatory cytokines. So when we are applying light to someone who has a very severe illness, we're hoping that we can cut down on the secondary effects of inflammation that's going all over the body. It's not just something that's happening in the lungs. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about an effect of the virus on the bloodstream, on actually the blood cells. They have found, and this all research was slow, a little bit coming, and what we now know is that that particular virus and its flavors, our variants that have come forward, change and destroy the hemoglobin of red blood cells. And the hemoglobin is what carries the oxygen. So in the early stages, they would put people under high oxygen, increase the oxygen levels because they were finding that they weren't able to fight off the virus because they didn't have the immune, etc. Well, what was happening systemically was the virus was messing with our circulatory system. Guess what fits and helps the circulatory system and improves the capacity of the red blood cells to function? Photobiomodulation. So again, it's been a slow awareness of its import to the whole life cycle that we've gone through for those of us who've been sick, for those of us that have watched people be sick, and prior to what we know, how many people were suffering and did pass. So it has been an effect on the whole system of our existence, our relationships, our how we functioned. So when we look at the value of photobiomodulation, how much more do we want to import the information that it's something to use prior to being sick?
Well, I will tell you that after being sick, my eldest brother was in the hospital and had been for weeks with COVID, and they were moving him into a care facility. And I said to some of my siblings, has anyone taken a light therapy device to the hospital? He lives in a different state than I do. And, they won't let us use it I'm like, they won't let you use it. You're afraid he's been almost dead and they're going to move him into a care facility. And you're worried if they're going to yell at you for using it. So one of them brought the light therapy unit in. They used it on him that day, once or twice, I can't remember. He never had to go. He started turning around immediately in the hospital because somebody took a light therapy unit in there, put it on his lungs, front and back of the chest, and the rest is history.
Well, that brings us to long COVID. So you had short COVID.
The second time I had it, I thought I was over it after a couple of weeks, but then I was going to go fly on an airplane and we had to bring a negative COVID sample. And I went and got tested, and the little pharmacist came out and said, ma'am, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but I have to report you as active COVID because you still, you're over the baseline of the virus. And I was dragging around like, I didn't think I was still sick. I thought it was the after effect of COVID that I was so tired. But apparently 90 days later, I was still testing positive for COVID.
So the symptoms of long COVID is a negative test, but the systemic effect is as if they have been hit by a truck. Fog, brain fog, inability to function for 2 or 3 hours at a time, amazing pain and discomfort. So where are we in knowing what's going on we're on the cusp of knowing more than we ever have known before. It has been a mystery. And there have been thousands and thousands of research individuals and universities trying to figure out what this long COVID thing is. And we're just now beginning to see that it is an immune reaction, which we knew at the beginning of COVID, but the inflammatory, systemically sticking around is huge. And so I think that we are beginning to look at what is happening to people who have long COVID. And we're sitting over here with a solution to inflammation, and we have a solution for the systemic issues, the pain and the discomfort and the dysfunction, and in particular for brain fog. So we're in a really wonderful spot in terms of being able to make a difference in the world of people who are suffering from this. So I believe that your knowledge that there is something out there that makes a difference is very powerful. So our sharing what we know is incomplete. It's the beginning of knowing, and therefore we want you to be aware that at least there's information here that may make a huge difference.
And that's a place to start. Because a lot of people have access to light therapy devices, may have one in their closet. Well, let me tell you, folks, your light therapy device does not work in your closet. You have to take it out, put it on, and turn it on. And through the pandemic, I had numerous calls of former either clients or students, adult students from light therapy or biofeedback, call me up and say, what can we do about this? And don't you have a light therapy device? Yes. Are you using it? Where is that thing? Okay. Well, number one, get it out, use it. But let me just tell you a few experiences that I've had with clients with post-COVID who weren't coming in to my office for that reason. They're coming in for pain or something else. But it would come up in conversation, or they were coughing that, I've had this cough ever since I had COVID. And the doctors say this or that or the other thing, or whatever they've tried, but it's just lagging on and on. So I would always say, well, do you want me to share with you what we are seeing that is very helpful? And Hannah Kroger was my teacher. She was a master herbalist, a homeopath, and just an incredible human being. And she has a line of products. So my basis is always talking about Hannah's work. But first I'll say, we'll put the lights on the front and back of your chest while you're here. Okay, that's number one. We're going to do that. And we're going to bring lights into the lungs, and then we put the lights other places too on the body, over the navel, etc. But I'll always ask them, do you have any vitamin A? Most people do. They have some in the cabinet. So Hannah would tell us whether it's a collapsed lung or you're getting over pneumonia or it's bronchitis, if you would take, or you could take a high dose vitamin A. She told me this when my little brother was suffering from a collapsed lung. And she said at the time, I think they would do vitamin A and vitamin E in international units. So you'd have to see how that translates now. But she said, now this is way over the recommended amount, but, to do 100,000 international units of vitamin A with beta carotene, it can have fish oil and whatever, but with beta carotene and whatever, and twice a day for 3 days. And then for the next 4 days, just once a day. And then regular amounts. And what it does is it lubricates the mucous membrane inside of the lungs and the intestines. All right. So that coupled with the light therapy, and then for a lot of my clients, we throw in the Kroger, lung formula to really target the lungs. But I've had people, come back and thank me like nothing else worked. That started working within a day or 2 or 3. And so there is help. We are learning more from dealing with people with post-COVID syndrome. But certainly if you have lights, pull them out, use them. They only work when you use them.
Excellent. Excellent. So we're just beginning to understand, and we have a new variant that is making its face known to us in a small community. Knowing that, it is very important to be safe. And, my mother always said, you need to wash your hands. And well, some of us did and some of us didn't, but she was an adamant person. She just really made us wash our hands. If we'd been outside, we had to wash our hands. If we came, it didn't matter what we were doing. If it wasn't even dirty, we had to wash our hands. So my recommendation is to listen to what people are suggesting in terms of protection, physical protection, and do that. And as my mom says, wash your hands and actually get sleep, pay attention to your symptoms, and address those symptoms as if it is maybe a COVID experience, and be aware of who you are with and at the distance between you. Sometimes it really doesn't matter because we don't have COVID or we're really not infectious. But as things begin to expand, get a little bit more common, we just need to be aware of where we are and who we're with and our own safety.
So I'd like to just point to a silver lining of having had COVID myself, and that I shared this experience actually with some of my own siblings who survived COVID and other friends who survived COVID. For those of us who actually survived it, and we started comparing notes, the profound spiritual effect of me having gone through that was at the end of it, when I was knowing, okay, I did survive that, and we're still in the middle of the pandemic and stuff is still shut down. I started just checking in with myself. How do I feel? How do I feel? How do I feel about life? I did survive that. I wasn't sure I was going to. And one of the things that I realized the biggest thing that I realized was that I felt empty. I felt completely empty. And I thought, wow, Alberto said he felt that way after COVID. I wonder if others feel that way. So I started making phone calls and I found out, yeah, that's the word. I feel empty. Well, the wonderful thing about having felt empty was I remember saying to God, who I love to call Big Sweetie, well, God, if I'm empty and I don't have my own agenda now in my life, I don't have anything I want to accomplish anymore. I don't have any more goals. I always wanted, I was going to do this and I was going to do that. I was going to accomplish this. I was going to go there. And as a matter of fact, I was scheduled to go get on a plane and go do a TED Talk. Okay. And I was, that was a big thing I wanted to do. But I felt so empty. And then I thought, well, if I don't have my own agenda, then now God can really use me for, to do what I'm really supposed to do in this world. And so as I checked in with other people, they had very similar experiences. So for us that survived COVID, many of us, there is a silver lining.
And I so thank you for your sharing that, because the connectivity to people who have similar experiences who don't talk about it because it's over, right? Not really. So this brings up the concept that reports are, and I can say this for myself, that there is great benefit to applying light to the body. And it isn't just physical, it's spiritual, it's holistic, it's connectivity to the importance. And if you use the time, if you're using light and you use that time as a sacred time, then it is even more of a healing time. So I encourage you to hear Ginger's story about her experience and take it in and just kind of look at everything that we've been talking about as value of light therapy and photobiomodulation, it's way more than just putting light on the body.
And just a footnote to the TED Talk was when the producer for TED Talk said, "Are you coming?" We've rescheduled the event now 3 times because middle of the pandemic, and here's how we're working it out to get it recorded. I said, "No, I'm not coming." And she said, "Well, why?" And I said, "Because I feel that I don't have anything of value to say to anyone." And that was such a freeing experience because I was empty. And now here we are. I surrendered to our great source, like, use me, big sweetie. If you want me to speak about something, then you should lead me there. And that's exactly how we got to even do this podcast.
Marcie Denton and Dr. Ginger Bowler are certified light therapy instructors and co-founders of the Light and Energy Training Seminar Certification Program. You can send us an email with your questions and comments to podcast@letskeepitlight.com, and be sure to visit us on Facebook and Instagram. This episode was engineered and mixed by Dr. Decibel Productions. I'm Sarah Weston. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Let's Keep It Light.